Welcome to Module 2 of this Summer 2020 Senior Training Capstone. Module 2 is going to focus on what we've sort of discovered over the couple of years is the highest point of stress for many of our capstone teachers, and that's the capstone paper. The goal of this module is to give everybody sort of an in-depth look at what does the capstone paper require, what are typical challenges that it presents for both students and teachers really, and what are things we can do to sort of mitigate that, to put both teachers and students on a path to success with this particular part of the Capstone P. And so we're going to dive right into it. For those totally new to Capstone, here are the basics. The paper is a 2,300 word research paper. The rubric says a 5-source minimum, though I will note the rubric does suggest that more than 5 sources is required for top marks. It should be professionally sourced, so in-text citations, a works cited page. We encourage MLA formatting. That's not necessarily required, but it's highly encouraged. Occasionally, capstone teachers want to push back on this a bit. I know many people who've gone to education schools are more familiar with APA format. MLA was sort of picked long ago by the sort of Senior Capstone Committee because it is what our students at Nashville area colleges most likely encounter in freshman composition classes. And so we sort of encourage MLA. There's some exceptions to this, and I'll reference you to the Capstone manual for that if you want to dive more into this. This paper is ideally supposed to be done working with the English 4 teacher of the capstone students, with ideally the 12th grade English teachers following their standards, which says that their students should be doing a research project, and then the capstone teacher giving a lot of support, giving students time to work on it, giving some students advice, taking them to the library, and the two groups are supposed to work this out. This has always been, in some places, a goal more than a reality. I will tell you this, including my own situation. And it's not something every senior English teacher gets training on about as they enter MNPS or they take on that assignment in their schools. And it really falls on the capstone teacher to start making that partnership and making it fruitful. But we're going to talk a little more about that too. What can you do with the English 4 teacher? What if you don't have a good partner? What do you do if you have some good partners, but you're teaching kids from lots of English 4 teachers, and it's not quite a one-to-one connection? I have worked in all those situations, having good partners, having scattered partnerships, and having no partners. We can't give up on this paper in any of those scenarios. Our students need to learn to write, and the goal of Module 2 here is to put all our teachers at a level of comfort doing so. You can see here in the list, page 29 of the rubric, these are the 10 things the paper is graded on. In our more successful partnerships, we've sometimes seen the English 4 teacher grade the more mechanical parts of it, and sometimes we see the capstone teacher or a CTE teacher, which is sometimes both, grade more of the content knowledge and some of the things that they're more comfortable with. We've seen, I know in my practice, I've had English 4 and the CAPS teachers, sometimes we take the student body, we break them in half. Each of us grade half the papers. There's a lot of models to go with it, but I'll reference the whole rubric on page 20. And so let's talk about why the capstone paper is sometimes, I mean usually. The benefits, though, and this is worth, I think, a little kind of deep philosophical look at why the capstone paper is important. And that's that the capstone paper mirrors what a lot of research says is the most common type of college writing, which is a student synthesizing a discussion on a topic of interest from lots of different sources. The most common type of college writing is not literary analysis, but because in high school lots of writing only happens in English classes, that sometimes be the types of writing the students are best at, and that shouldn't be the case. But the capstone paper offers the chance for a student to pick a topic of interest and then write and research and develop a large body of knowledge on a topic from lots of different well-done sources. That is a skill all of our students need, and it's a skill that they need very badly. And when we dive into the capstone paper and we really encourage its blossoming as teachers, despite difficulties, despite sometimes our feeling of own inadequacies as teachers, we are putting students on a path to being better communicators. And that is why the capstone paper is something very much worth attempting, even if it's not always done well. On the sort of pedagogical level, a capstone paper is also good teaching. It asks students to grapple with things that are very real world. It asks them to plan their own thinking. It asks them to really take something from the world and dig into it and really learn about it. And that is part of the core of what makes very good teaching. These are some very typical problems I notice my students tend to have. Many capstone teachers over the years tell us they see the same. Many of our students, for many reasons, which is a subject beyond sort of the scope of Module 2, do not have lots of background with long form writing, do not have usually any background with quality research skills or finding good sources or putting different sources together with their own thoughts into completely formed paper. And Capstone can help alleviate that. And if we are going to be high school teachers, we need to have enough pride, I think, in our own high school's experience that we do not need to be sending students out into the world having no exposure and no attempt at those skills at all. That's sadly in too many places the status quo, except for Capstone. And to think of this course, this is the capstone. We want to put a very rigorous and very authentic end to the senior year experience. And that's what we're here to do. But these are all problems here that Module 2 is going to try to equip teachers to equip students to help overcome these problems. At the same time, the capstone paper also presents problems often for teachers themselves, and these are all things that I have heard in capstone workshops before. Many teachers, they enter capstone through lots of places, and these are typical problems. And I think lots of people have them at some point. What I just want to suggest, and we're going to kind of dig some here into equipping through these things, is that all of these things can be overcome, and none of them themselves is necessarily a barrier to the student having a good learning experience on the capstone paper, particularly if the teacher doesn't feel very strong with mechanics or spelling, or they do not believe they've given a lot of instruction to long form paper or long form writing in their classes before. That's okay. We have supports for that. If a student has an IEP, well, that's wonderful. You can follow the IEP. Use that exceptional education teacher. Find something that works for the kids. It's not on this slide, but ELL adaptations are also allowed. To the English for teacher problems, what I do want to suggest here is we won't always have an English for teacher partner, and in education that happens sometimes. Good partnerships don't always develop for one or many other reasons. That's not necessarily the point of Module 2. Module 2 is to give the capstone teacher here a chance for, if you don't have a good partnership to help support you on this, to instead give the capstone teacher an instructional framework that a good, successful attempt at a capstone paper can be made. And so I really want to stress this. We've seen this at schools sometimes. Not having a good English for teacher partner is not an excuse to ignore the capstone paper entirely. That is a disservice to our students and their instruction and their development. So with this note, let's talk about won't work. And I'm sorry, I've seen too much of this over the years, which is just, first of all, ignoring the difficulties of writing a paper, giving a kid a due date without a lot of support, giving poor instruction, giving not a lot of support because the teacher is not comfortable doing lessons about this. If we're going to be successful capstone teachers, we're going to have to build supports for our kids, and Module 2 is going to provide some of those. But I really just encourage you to try to tackle the problems of the capstone paper. If you look at this and you're thinking, my kids can't do this, I can't teach this, if it's anxiety inducing, I really want to say, yes, you can. In some places, yes, your students can. In some places, it may be stunted. There'll be problems. It won't be perfect all the time. But I'm saying that the journey is just as valuable every step along the way, even if the end destination is a little rough because it's everybody's first time doing it. But these things will not work. These things here, they lead to classroom disasters, and they're not. So what I'm proposing here in Module 2 is I have broken down the capstone paper into 9 stages. These are not in the manual. They are not gospel. But I want to propose a system of instruction to help teachers who need a little help putting students on a path to good research writing. For some students, you might tweak with the order a bit. Some steps may be broken out into more. If you have taught writing, you may have done similar things to this, but your order doesn't look quite like this. That's fine. There's many good models of writing. I'm putting one out here that I think looks well previous for this assignment. And by all means, I encourage you, if you find a better one than this, please let me know. We are always trying to improve. So the goal here of Module 2 is we're going to sort of equip you through various places of this for each of these stages. We're going to walk through you and point out some resources that you have available to work on the capstone paper. This is a typical timeline, I think, for sort of my average academy student. They're coming to school fairly regularly. They work hard, but they have no background in this kind of writing. They're going to struggle a bit. They're going to have some success, and they're going to get done. This is typically what it looks like. The entire paper process usually takes me a couple months, with doing a little bit on it every day with some other capstone things worked in there. And I really try to slow it down and spread it out, because most of my students entering having no experience with this type of writing whatsoever. I just assume that they don't. If they do, it is a pleasant surprise. And this is usually how long it takes. Note for me, the longest part is the research. And I tell these kids all the time, they can't write about anything until they really know about something. The longest part of this paper process should be researching and finding good sources and figuring out what they say and making plans for them, not actually writing. You really want to put students not at a place where they're staring at a screen with 300 words and they don't know where to go anymore. We've got to equip them to get past that problem, and that starts with having a lot of research. The whole back end of my first quarter is usually devoted to developing an abundance of research and knowledge beyond what is needed to write the paper. These are some possible things. As a capstone teacher, you want to reach out to your English 4 teachers on your team or those who academy students you have. These are things where you need to ask them to support you. These are all things that are generally covered by their standards. And these are things that good English 4 teachers should be teaching anyway. You want to suggest that the teaching of these things happen at a time where it's beneficial to your classroom and your students. The benefit for the English 4 teachers here is that they are supposed to teach a research project. That is in their standards. And you can offer the capstone paper to them as a way of fulfilling that requirement. And one thing you can have them do is focus on skill support on topics like these while you're giving the students a lot of time to work and you're giving them some feedback and advice and supporting with some of the resources we have here. I don't think you get to pass this all off. Remember, it is for your class. But get yourself some support. If you see anything here that you might need help with or all of it, I would email English 4 teachers saying, hey, fall semester, September, October, can we really double down on these type of skills? These are what our seniors need. Very, very much, I think that's a great thing to do, and to do it. At the same time, your librarian or media specialist, this is a great place to equip them. I have learned definitely through using our outstanding media specialist Todd Duncan at Hunters Lane that the library often has lots of resources that I don't even know about or the kids don't even know about. And I think if you have a very talented library media specialist is maybe getting tired of just telling kids rules for the library every day, having them to partner and mentor kids on sort of their research projects they want to do on lots of different topics can be, I think, energizing to some. I've certainly seen that. Seen that in lots of different ways. This is a list you may want to track them on. Your librarian may want to develop lessons on them or have the kid in to teach them some of these skills. They have to be observed for their own observations too, and this is a good way to help them with that. Tell them you want to have your seniors in the library early. Tell them they want to learn about the databases. They want to learn how to use Tennessee Electronic Library, how to use limitless libraries. If you are feeling you're like, I've never taught research before, get your librarian media specialist to help you. Partner with them. We should all be in this for your. And these are particularly things I think that are well done to be focused on in Capstone. The benefit of Capstone for this Capstone paper is the Capstone teacher has time. You have time for the students to sit there, to work on the paper, to make mistakes, to get advice, to help each other, for you to help them, to change their mind. The kids have a lot more time to hone their writing than I would if I had them just a traditional English class and I was trying to do this, because eventually you have to get to some of the other standards. Well, your goal is to get a successful project done, and so Capstone can take something that's in a place a mess, and you can go a little slower with the kids to build their skills. And so I think some of these things, the very well and beneficial use of time, is something that the Capstone teacher needs to make sure is always happening. So again, here we see a possible rough plan. Again, this is a timeline that I use some with our English 4 teachers. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Just getting totally honest here. But this is something that when we can usually implement it, has had a better chance of working than other things that we've tried. Again, I'll say this again, English 4 teachers do not necessarily know about the Capstone paper, and I think it's that Capstone teacher who needs to make that. So we're going to look at each of the 9 stages of the resource process. I'm just going to point out a few things that are available to help you that we have in the assignments folder. First, research, which is really the second longest stage for me. A good beginning help is to teach students that they need to, that I use the phrase with them, to research like a college student. And college students usually just don't put things in Google. If your students do that on their topics, they'll get 10 websites that all say the same different thing. Then they'll put all those sources together and they'll write down what they learned, and they have 250 words because everything's the same way. They need in-depth knowledge. These are great resources. If you don't know about them, again, I think work with your library media specialist on these things. Limitless Libraries and Tennessee Electronic Library. If the students are using advanced search and lots of good search terms, they can find things. Usually I want to start off with kids. I want them to find 10 general sources on topics they're interested in. Even if it's some different stuff and they don't know about it, and they just kind of want to go figure out how much am I really interested in about it, that's valuable. Get your kids looking and reading good quality information. Teaching them how to do some basic research resources. And again, if that is not your cup of tea, get your librarian media specialist in on this. In the resources folder on Schoology, there are really 2 things that help a lot with this process. And this always makes the kids giggle. It's not my acronym, but the CRAP test worksheet, which is credibility, reliability, authority, audience, and purpose, is a good checklist to see if a website is worthy of being a source. The source hunt template is something I have my students do. I have them find 10 sources about things that they are interested in for stage 1 of their preliminary research. They learn to get some basic source information. They learn to summarize, and they learn to comment on what they're doing. And I have students find 10, and it usually takes quite a few classes to get the students used to the databases, to doing advanced searches, to filling out the source hunt templates. I make them each a grade, a fairly significant grade. And if the student changes their mind on what they want to do halfway through, that's awesome. They're making decisions and they're eliminating things. And you got to leave the kids some room to wiggle. There you see one of the particular templates. Again, you have a larger version and typable version of this in the assignments folder. I have them do it online, but you could have it handwritten and put it in a notebook. Here you see a complete one that is done. Note that it's finished. That's really key. I really go over the kids. I expect these to be done well. They found an online journal. We have a source author. They summarize it. They have 2 key quotations. So that forces them to choose things that are important. Then they used to have a couple sentences commentary on it. Again, this is my template. You could change it for your needs. Something I find that works well. Here we found one. This was found on Tennessee Electronic Library. You see the same thing. Note that they're not always perfect. Like this person has probably confused part of the subtitle with the actual author, but that's one of the things you kind of want to coach and teach the kids through. We can see that the student, she did read it well and understand what it was about, but again, she's getting used to reading sources. And this is usually, I want students to go on exploration and read 10 things about stuff they're interested in that they might do a capstone project on. They may be all on the same thing. They may have 5 on one thing, 5 on another, but that's okay. We want them to be making some decisions. And so no real incredibly sort of funky skills for this, but your goal now is to get the students into something that they actually want to do their capstone paper on. And giving them lots of exemplars, lots of examples is, I think, very helpful. The capstone manual has about 5. You'll get a few here. We've got quite a few sample papers in the exemplar section in the resources folder. But first of all, if you can get them to turn their capstone paper into a question they are trying to answer, that will guide their exploration a bit instead of just a general topic. And it's good if they can then break that sort of down into secondary questions. That can become headings on their outline. When the student has their overall question they're trying to answer, then they have subheadings. They're beginning to have a framework. I tell the kids they can take their secondary questions, put them into the papers, and they can become chapter titles. And slowly they begin to see the organization of what they can do take shape. Any student should be able to answer, again, these basic questions. This for me, when I have them do this in class, this actually becomes the beginning of their introductions to tell their audience why they picked this topic, why it's important, what do people need to know to understand it. And that is often, a student needs to be able to say this, I think, before they can really begin to explore it. And I have them do this here at stage 2. That will eventually become the bulk of their introductions, and we have a little more on that when we reach the draft. So the outline, annotated, and bibliography, both here. It can vary at some point. If the students have good questions already developed, they could go ahead and make a preliminary outline where they then begin to put subtopics under that preliminary question. You can see the simple outline format in the resources folder for what that looks like. Some students, though, instead their first overall question will spark their curiosity, and they may need to do more dedicated research just in that before they can outline. That's okay. I'll tell you, as I was making this framework, I struggled which needed to be first, but I thought I would just say, I think most students would be better with an outline and then researching, but you may find some exceptions, and that's okay. Some things you could possibly do. I do have students usually twice at this stage. I give them a sample capstone paper, usually one from previous years, and I have them make an outline of it, like what did this student probably do. You could also give them raw source information, have them practice making bibliographies out of them, have everyone do an annotated bibliography, use one to 2 sources, giving everyone the same source. Again, I think sometimes capstone teachers think, well, the students are just going to be doing all the work. They'll be making the project. I just kind of got to walk around and monitor the process. Now, kids need coaching. And this is something that can be done in the capstone class. And they need good live modeling of what they need to be doing. Or you're just not going to have a class as successful as it could be. And if you need support with these things, that's why we have the resources folder. That's why we have this workshop. That's why we have the Capstone group. That's why you have an English 4 teacher. That's why you have a library media specialist. Um, let's build the course. Again, and again, we have this stuff in the resource folder. You will see there's several outline models. There's both shorter ones that use preliminary outline, and there's a longer detailed one I often use when the kids use to make their drafting outline, which is sort of their final sort of outline plan when they've done all their research and they're right about to set to writing. So when the kids have a full sort of well in-depth outline and a full set annotated bibliography, and that's a long period of time, they're finally ready to start writing. Just as a guide, for most of my students, the research begins in September. The drafting usually happens in November. And the drafting, if the student has done it, does not take very long. And this, I think, is the great test. If a student has holes in their outline, they're not done researching. And they've researched and they're not read it, and they need to be point back into this. This is another place for English to get help with English teachers. Students will need help integrating paraphrasing into their writing and quotations in their writing to avoid accidental plagiarism, or even the intentional kind. We have some helps for skills of these things in the drafting folder on Schoology. But at this point, the students need to be following their plan. There will be rough writing, and I like rough, authentic writing. That means the student is really trying. Some basic things, again, in the resource folder. We have the quote sandwich model. That's a short PowerPoint you can use to teach students how to integrate quotes into writing. Lots of sample papers, tips for writing the introductions, all available in the resources folder on editing. And this, again, first of all, here are 4 things you can do that if you like, I'm not a good speller, I'm not good at checking grammar. Here are 4 things that you could do that will help the students with their own editing and making their writing better, that the teacher almost doesn't have to do any head work on. If you were totally scared of the whole subject, you can have them peer review. You can have them put parts into Grammarly.com. It'll do a certain number of words for free. You can have kids read their paper out loud and have them mark every place where they stutter. That's usually a place where they need to revise. You can have students record themselves reading their paper, because usually the kids are not good at rereading what they've written. Force them to do that. Make them video themselves or an audio clip and send it to you. That would be a sort of a great in-depth exploration. And then, yeah, you can conference them with their little. And I say this again, if the mechanics of writing is something that scares off a teacher, let me tell you something that is very true. What the kids mainly need feedback on is if they're making sense. Are they being clear? Are they having clarity? And if the teacher is giving that, at least feedback on that level, I think instructionally you're doing the students a very good thing. Just because you're worried your feedback may not be perfect is not a reason to not give them good feedback at all. I think any of us are able to read something and say if it makes sense or not, and what it needs to help it make more sense. And that is first, and I think the most important level that students need to learn, that they need to write with clarity, that they need to be clear. So if a prospect, and some of my Capstone teachers tell me they are, of checking commas gives you anxiety, I'm here to free you from that and put you on the better task of clarity. We have a few things in the resources module to help you. I have 3 different models for peer review. There's a grammar checklist for the paper, a format checklist for the paper. You can have the kids use that as part of the peer review. You can use it yourself. You can have the students self-evaluate using. So at this point, I know I've made the grammar point several times even before this slide. I just really feel it. When I conference with kids, because it's not unusual for me to have over 100 Capstone students, I focus on the majors. I don't want the paper to be plagiarized. I want the formatting to be clear. I want the sources to be cited. I need it to make sense. I need the introduction to follow what will be discussed in the conclusion. That's what I'm really focusing on. If you are worried you don't have time to read all of these outside of class, I often conference with students while I read the paper, and I make them write down what I say they need to fix, and then they have to go sit down and fix it. And then it usually happens later versus me laboring over them for 3 weeks, and sort of dumping them on there. I think that's something that helps a lot of my capstone kids a lot. And as much as you have time, that's really a practice I encourage. It's a time investment, but talking with your kids about their writing one-on-one, I think is better than sometimes me just marking it up with a red pen. All right, plagiarism. So here's the bad news. I've sent some software queries, but as of now, I do not know the MNPS software status for any plagiarism checker software through 2020 through 2021. In my experience, plagiarism typically happens with students who've not been working on the paper, and then a paper suddenly appears at the last minute. Now, I realize many of us work in different situations, but a lot of the plagiarism I work with is not subtle. There's a few ways. One, you could have students turn in copies of the sources to be compared with the paper. If you're worried about plagiarism, again, a student should be able to tell you some details about the writing and why they picked those things, and talking with the students if plagiarism comes up. If in my class, and this is really sort of our Hunter's Lane policy, if a kid plagiarizes stuff, they do get a chance to fix it, because often it's kids who've gotten behind and they try to rush in to finish things. Capstone has time, so if a kid is really going to make a real effort, but they just lack the skills, I sit down with them, I tell them what they need to do, and I give them a deadline. Now, if a student refuses to fix things, that's one thing. But often, particularly, I talk in Module 6 somewhat about how I help kids who get really, really behind with Capstone. These moments in plagiarism talks are often a chance to get them back on the right track. And that is the end of Module 2. There's lots more that could be said about the paper. And so before you move to the assessment, I do just want to say that both Michelle and I are available by email and in the best place to go, the Capstone group on Schoology. If you want to talk more about some of these issues that we've raised, or if I covered something quickly in the interests of time that you would like to have a little more in-depth on, if you need more resources for a particular skill, we are here and available for you. And I really want to stress that I am very invested in your all's personal success with this in your all's classrooms across Nashville. So again, I thank you for joining us here for Module 2. The quiz is right below. And have a wonderful day, and we'll see you in Module 3.